Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello.
you.
Good morning from Munich, Germany. I'm Meenakshi. Uh,
Hi.
Hi. This is my first time joining.
Well, hey,
I'm
it's our first time for everybody. This is
yes,
literally the first one. So,
quite excited.
yeah.
Finally, feeling, getting a feeling of what is the world doing around APIs. So, especially when you're stuck at home for months.
I know, I know. But isn't it fun to actually be able to travel, from home to all kinds of
Yes,
places?
yes, true.
So, yeah.
Let me see if I can also switch on my
Yeah.
video.
And I know that Miguel there is joining us from Spain, but Ikena, where are you coming from
I'm
right now?
from Essex in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm in Helsinki, Finland. So
Mhm.
we have quite a gathering here around Europe this time. Yeah, I'm used to having all these late night calls with the US API folks. So this is refreshing to kind of be in a normal time. Although I can't say it would be like sunlight or daylight coming in. It's pretty cloudy. But hey, so I guess we could start and actually why this meeting was kind of why the topic for this meeting was around the API Ops Cycles design guide for REST APIs was actually because Miguel suggested that. So I'm in a progress with a customer of mine actually to kind of design their API governance and guidelines on how they do their APIs and we recently joined at Osango into the Open API initiative and one reason we joined was that we noticed that there was quite a lot of problems with people trying to actually use the Open API specification and try to figure out what earlier already, but right now there was this discussion that what about GraphQL and what about async APIs and all of that. So I think that we should kind of open up the floor a bit into what is your interest in this topic. should we start from the Open API and the APIOps Cycles design guide and where are you kind of in with those topics? So who wants to go first? Ikena, you were here first, so do you want to go
Yeah,
first?
no problem. Yeah, so I kind of got interested in API ops when so first of all, the company I was working for, we had an API program which I kind of led in terms of developer experience and API program management. And just working across that, it's one of the things I learned in retrospect was just we were kind of maturing in terms of the process around building APIs.
Yeah.
And so when I came across the work you did on API Ops Cycle, I was like, this is what we need. And
Glad
so
to hear.
yeah. And I also been taking a look at your book on API economy, at least not a few bits of it.
Yeah.
And that kind of just presenting that holistic approach, high level approach to building APIs, I think is what we need. I think is what a lot of organizations need, which is why I kind of got interested in this and keen to learn more about,
I'm interested to know what's your kind of background. Are you kind of more into the very tech or product manager or
Yes.
something like
So
that?
I've been an engineer, a software engineer since 2006, hands-on, building all kinds of software systems, especially for financial companies, whether investment banks or fintechs, or government agencies dealing with tax and that kind of thing. So, so on the software side, pretty comfortable with that, but I'm kind of now moving more into the API product management kind of
that's what
area.
I was guessing. Yeah, because that is something that we see a lot that there are either product managers who are like purely product managers and they're struggling with the kind of, tech side in general, but APIs as being a little bit different kinds of animals there. And then the kind of techies who suddenly find themselves into like, but API is just a software and, and then come up with this product management and everything else. And yeah, it's interesting.
Absolutely, that's been my experience. And for the company I was working with, that basically was our experience, because you had the product managers on one end who were obviously expert at product management, but when it came to APIs, there was like, what's this? This thing is different. And there's all the technology, there's actually understanding, like, how do you test usability? How do you apply product management to this thing?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, there's the tech guys who are only tech focused. It's like a solution. You're building an integration solution who don't actually see the product side. And my manager can't put me in the middle, you know.
Yeah,
and I could then
that's a
see
fun
both
place.
sides.
Yeah.
So
I'd be in that too, and it was called development manager or something like that. And I felt like, you know, the company Nokia, originating from Finland, their slogan was connecting people, and I felt like that was the thing I was supposed to do, and not really connecting the systems. But hey, good. So what about, like, one quick question more? OpenAPI, are you in or out? Do you like OpenAPI? Do you use OpenAPI?
is that a question for me?
For you.
Okay, yes. So yes. Love OpenAPI. So I kind of got on this project, got introduced to it because first of all, I actually got introduced to Async API first.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we had messaging systems that we needed to emit events for, and we needed a way to specify those events so that people could collaborate around them. The product managers could look at them, the engineers, it could be documented. And so I found out about Async API, and used that to start documenting our APIs, explaining it to the product managers, to the engineers, putting it into our process, so that when we would use this to design our events first, kind of try API first development, but for events. And so I got with the Async API, and then from there I kind of went backwards to Open API, which is what most people probably start with for our REST API. We had a microservices platform, and lots of our internal microservices usually talked via messaging, but some of them via REST. Our external APIs were GraphQL. But for our internal APIs, again, I started looking at how we could use the Open API to document the REST interfaces for the microservices, because that is something that we needed to make more visible internally, so that every member, both engineers and product managers, could see what messages were being passed across.
But that's becoming like the scenario that you're describing is becoming more and more the kind of norm. It's kind of like we used to talk about cloud, and then we decided that no, it's not going to be like, which cloud should I build this stuff to? It's like, which clouds should I build this stuff into? And now we are in this, like, it's not like REST or GraphQL or async. It's like everything mixed up. Thanks. But hey, Meenakshi, can I ask if I'm pronouncing your name, by the way, in any way correctly?
It's fine. Meenakshi is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
So
what is your story?
Well, I have to say, when he was describing product manager, so a quick introduction. So I am the global product manager. So I can maybe somewhat relate to what he said, but I have a completely different experience. So I'm working for a company called Giesecke and Debian, and we are a classic traditional company who manufactures and personalized payment cards, and along with other things. Obviously, in a good and a bad way, COVID actually increased the sale of the cards, especially the contactless. But on the other hand side, a lot of cardholders are demanding more and more features. And then we said, okay, let's get into the world of APIs.
I have to say, as a frequent traveler to the Central Europe and Germany, for example, that if COVID has brought anything good, it's probably that.
Yes, absolutely. Especially to Germany, I have to say, because Germany was always a traditional cash market, and now everyone's getting into contactless.
Oh my God.
In the API world, my role right now is a little bit acting like an evangelist, trying to
Mm,
educate everyone the benefits of API internally.
yeah.
It has been a challenge. I've been doing this for over almost 2 years now, and finally I got the buy-in that we start launching APIs for our customers.
Mm,
Unfortunately, I can't disclose much because we are about
mm,
to launch something in 1 month's time. uh, but in the context of stories, I would say we are quite basic. We are still using REST APIs,
yeah.
still trying to understand how we should design the APIs. So that's where I had stumbled across your website, and trying to get some tips and really teaching software developers, because they always think APIs is just something more internal. They
Mm,
never think you can make a business out of it. And how we work is, in the beginning, it was just me and a small team of 2 people, and then we realized it wouldn't work. You need a structure for each API product. You need product managers, you need developers there, you need someone to take the entire ownership of an API, because it's not just the API itself that's the interface. It's also the whole time spent in designing the
mm,
API, the whole time spent finding the benefits, explaining the business, explaining the sales, how to sell it.
mm,
And as of today, I'm actually at that point. I
great.
think I tried introducing GraphQL,
Mm.
and the developers are like this, like they're like, don't tell
I
these
know.
jargons.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
But on the
so
other hand, that's not also a bad approach, because I've had
mhm,
like also this kind of different kind of experience that sometimes very eager, I'm not saying young, I'm saying eager, developers have that approach that they have to just mix up everything that is the brand new and cool and shiny. And then like nobody has any experience of that in the production, and nobody
mhm.
actually knows even if it fits the need, but they just need to kind of use it because it's so cool, and some guru in some conference said that this is like the way to go. So
Right.
in a how do I say, PCI compliant and finance related world of business, I wouldn't say that it's a bad approach necessarily.
Correct.
A little
Yeah.
bit, you know.
Yeah. We are absolutely right now. I'm stuck with the same thing,
Yeah.
because we somehow managed to get some APIs out,
Mm,
tested with the customers, but everyone just asks. All the banks are like, "What about PCI? What about PCI?" So that's when I said, okay, I need to educate myself more,
yeah.
understand from the industry, because I think the world of API has already evolved. Now new things are coming in. So why should I invent something when I can just take some
Yeah.
best practices and apply it?
But that's exactly one hard part of the design, is that
Mm.
there are industries which have uh, tradition for how, like they have some industry specific standards on how the API should be designed. They might be a really good thing, or they might
Yes,
not be a
yes.
really good thing, depending on kind of how far from the core use cases your
Hmm.
cases are. And that's kind of one of the issues. But that actually brings me to kind of what I was thinking we could talk about today, and I'll kind of start up the conversation around what should be kind of the design guidelines to design these APIs, and how do all these specifications fit into together.
Right.
And I was thinking that maybe if Miguel is also with us, he had to go somewhere shortly. But if Miguel, you are kind of hearing this, then jump in. I'd like to have you there also, kind of telling about your cases, although I know a little bit about them. But while he's sorting out stuff, I think we could move on. And kind of how I thought about this was that and this is related to some amount of discussions in for example, the Open API initiative lately, and then there's this group of API specification demand generation, like basically why should we use specs and what are all the questions around it. Kin Lane is the API evangelist is organizing that on Fridays, and there has been this. We just recently had an API Days Helsinki and European Commission this event, and there were a lot of different discussions around this. And what kind of I got from them to this discussion today is that there's kind of that productization layer. There's the API as a product layer that should be kind of designed in one way. And in APIOps Cycles, there are these different kind of canvases and different phases that kind of touch upon that. So there's the value proposition canvas and there's the business model canvas, and there you could kind of draw a direct line to the, for example, Open API spec and say that, okay, if you get this value proposition here and your API name here, or then move that into this field in the Open API specification. That's pretty kind of clear. There might be some security, some SLA things that are coming from the business impact canvas, for example, and privacy things that could be related to specific points. But then when it comes to the actual endpoint design and then the information, or like the data structures and formats design, then we have those different canvases there, which are kind of the push and pull model canvases and the information architecture canvas. And fine, on the canvas level, that's fine. You can get kind of these areas about like this is the data and these are the requests and responses that we probably would get, and these standards might relate to this. Although, of course, APIOps Cycles doesn't tell you, like as a method right now, which standards to use. The design guideline, if we kind of look at that, is basically telling you some very generic things like, you know, use ISO codes and for dates and a few other things. So if I kind of get open the specific document here in the method. Let me see if I can share the screen. So I kind of identified these three layers, and I think that we should kind of decide which layers are we kind of discussing and what approach shall we take to this. But right now, what this style guide tries to be is kind of like a collection of best practices for mostly kind of B2B or organizational APIs, like stuff that you actually need to mind, which is not necessarily told anywhere else. Like, for example, here you say refer to ISO standards. Nowadays, it might be clear to everybody that that's what you should do. It wasn't a few years back, and it certainly isn't, for example, for some junior developers who are designing their first APIs. The dates and times and currencies and everything else are usually the one thing that goes amiss. And for example, the schema org and other things. And localization is one thing, and privacy and security is one of those things that you need to mind so that you don't do stuff there. So these are kind of very generic and robust security related and so forth. And there are some best practices around versioning and namespaces, but then it gets to the endpoints and it gets to the kind of the details of how the endpoints work, but not so much into what anymore after the beginning of how the data or attribute should be there, and definitely not saying how you should model this into an open API according to the open API specification, for example. So what do you think? Miguel, you joined up. So do you want to kind of share some thoughts around this? Can you take the mute off?
Yeah. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
This is Miguel. Okay, just about what I'm talking, I think that best approach is to start working. Okay, it's just build a prototype or a minimal product, viable product, and then start making a life cycle, a pipeline of building the API, and add more features to the API in every cycle. So you should get feedback from the user and don't spend a lot of time to build all the requirements of the API. Yeah, I know that for the banking
PCI, yeah.
PCI security requirements are very, very strong, so very important. But sometimes you can solve it in some way. You can build a small API and you don't need to add all the requirements that PCI requirements are to be. So you can start take to production a small amount of resources on an API and get feedback from the user, and and have all the amount of requirements for the PCI that you need for this API, not all the whole PCI requirements, but they are so strong in some ways. But just for read information, you don't need a lot of them. Just to bring information to the user is enough.
So Miguel, you're basically describing the kind of the design process and kind of guidelines for that, and that's exactly the kind of the point, and what you said was exactly the point of APIOps Cycles. So the question actually about this is that, okay, if we separate two things, if we separate the process of designing an API, and then we separate the kind of guidelines of how the API should look, kind of from a should it use Open API specification, for example, if it's a REST API, and if it should, then how should you specifically use, for example, Open API specification? So these are kind of related questions, but they are different questions. So, and of course there is that, you have an excellent point there that, for example, if you go to the minimum viable API architecture here in APIOps Cycles, that in the prototype phase, the point is exactly that you have collected these requirements and only the essential ones, and then you prototype exactly like you said. For example, you could prototype it like using, for example, an Open API or async API or other spec, and kind of make the prototype. It could be even executable, or at least you can share it with people. But the question is how to actually design. Like if we come from the point that this API needs to handle, for example, credit card data here, and it has to have the customer's name and address and whatever else there, and probably it needs to be able to do like get, for example, a person's credit card or list of credit cards, and it probably needs to be able to, I don't know, create a transaction or whatever we think that it needs to be doing. So then how do you actually model that API? Let's call it modeling the API as opposed to designing, so that we can keep track. If the design is the process and the model is the kind of how it looks.
Can I actually jump in there if I may?
Please do.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's an excellent question, Marjukka, you've raised, and yeah, thanks, Miguel, for that contribution as well. So I think that, so the question I'm asking myself is, does kind of modeling and domain modeling actually come in here, right? In terms of actually, if you look at it, you know, the process of writing any piece of software is actually starting with modeling, you know, thinking about what are the main concepts in the domain, and then how do these domain objects interact, what are the interactions, and then once we understand that, we can actually start writing the software, right? And I believe, yes, you've actually covered that in some of your canvases. And I think that I'm asking myself whether that actually that kind of thing needs to happen. And even if it's for an MVP, as you said, even if for a small MVP, like for a minimum viable thing that we need to get out. And then once that model, it's clear in the heads of the product managers and the engineers. But I'd actually put more emphasis on the product side at this stage, because I think it's really important that the product, it makes sense in the head of the product managers. Because engineers just like to get into some details that may actually complicate the model, but just that simple model, this is how these things interact, it's a payment coming through or whatever. And once that's clear, then, okay, how do we specify this in our open API specification, right? How does this domain object or model object actually translate to the API, to an API object? How do we represent it? What are the fields, et cetera, et cetera? So I think like, like, I'm not sure which of your canvas is here. I think
it's kind of starting from, like, if we come from the value prop, and then we would kind of, well, you could usually do a few other things, but then you come to these data requirements, and you start to kind of figure out that, if I open this a little bit bigger, so you start to figure out this kind of, what are the concepts around it? What is kind of the domain model around it? Although there's a caveat here. So it's kind of like, if you get stuck to the domain model, like you would when you design, for example, a database or object-oriented architecture. So then with APIs, that might not lead to the right value prop. So if you kind of come from your value prop, and then like, you could have the customer themselves or a partner or somebody in a very specific situation asking, for example, for those credit card numbers or something. And even though the credit card and the credit card numbers are kind of in that domain, and they are linked in a certain way to the customer, and so that sort of stuff. So in that context, it might not make sense to, for example, return exactly only one kind of concept, or it would make sense to return only partial or combination of some. And that's kind of why there are these, like, what questions should be kind of answered to with this API. So yes, exactly like that. And now the question is kind of what are the problems that we would be having when translating this kind of a little bit more high-level model and discussion into the actual API endpoints and data kind of data models there, and that's actually where I'm jumping here. So where originally I know these are not the easiest templates to understand, but what these templates were for, because what I wanted to where am I? Yes, here. So what I wanted for people to kind of think about was that, okay, if I'm making this, like, list all my credit card numbers, I'm giving your email address or something, some identifier, and then I want a list of my credit card numbers. So I have this request, let's say that it's like my email address. And then the outcome, the response here, should be the list of credit cards. And at this point, we are not thinking of how they will look in the code. We just list them as bullet points. But then there needs to be this, like, stuff that happens in the machine to get that, or in multiple machines or in multiple systems. How do we get from that email address to that list of credit cards? And maybe there needs to be some formatting and stuff here. Can you Menakshi, kind of, have you got this kind of case, or if you can tell anything about it?
Yeah, I'll just share my recent experience. And for example, we are working on a use case for tracking the card. So how can we deliver the card to the cardholder in time and let the cardholder know when the card would arrive? And what we actually did is, instead of using the data requirements template, we used something like this. So we started off just designing, but from a response So
Okay.
more like a reverse. So we said, okay, what does the cardholder needs to know? Oh, the cardholder needs to know when the card would arrive, what time, and from which shipment provider. So using that as an example, we went back and said, okay, if this is the use case, then you just need an identifier of the card as a request to pass it in the request. And then taking that 2 steps behind, we started mapping out which systems internally need to work or be redesigned to fulfill this requirement. So
Yeah.
we use your template, but we did not literally use the
Yeah.
innate.
I okay.
Yeah,
Get the
we
point.
just, what we did, we used, because our company is quite old, so we still use PowerPoints. So we started jotting this in a PowerPoint to say, okay, if this is the response, what the request could be to be
Yeah.
compliance with the regulations, and how less secure information we can skip out from the API, and
Yeah.
then taking that, we went 2 steps behind and we said, okay, now we need to change this and this and that.
Yeah.
And
So
that's
basically, can I
yeah,
ask? So in this kind of like if you ask from your systems kind of as a raw question, if you ask with the card identifier, then you get like 100 in pieces of data probably.
right.
Like yeah. So you'll get a lot of extra fields and stuff. So let's call it 100 attributes to be clear. So you get a lot of stuff, and then you needed to kind of actually filter out the stuff that you
Correct.
could show, and
Yeah,
it's relevant here.
yeah,
And probably sometimes you need to do some conversions or some kind of obfuscating, some like anonymizing or doing some other kind of conversions there. For example, well, date formats are very clear, but for example, which provider there might be in your internal systems like this, some kind of list code or number or something like, okay, this is, Visa and this is MasterCard or this is
right.
something else.
Yeah,
And then you need to clarify that to the user in a language that they understand or in a term or name that they understand. So this is like the idea. So now if we go to the actual kind of towards the actual design of
sorry, Marjukka, just a
yes,
quick question there. So
yeah,
the response value and the perform request sections there,
yeah.
does that mean those both sides, those happen on the server side, basically? So the operations,
Yeah, they're yeah, exactly. So the idea is that this is kind of a query or an input to a system, which, and of course, depending on the actual architecture, these could be performed by the same layer, but these could be performed also by a zillion different layers.
yes,
So
yes.
the point here is that this template tries to be like this children's book approach, that the people around the table or around the Zoom discussion don't actually need to know too much, all of them, about the implementation details. They just generally need to know that there's somewhere a database, for example, that has that data. And somebody needs to know, okay, hey, if we do this, then we'll get these 100 attributes. What do we do with them? Because we don't need them or something. Or we have these and these data issues. For example, the when card arrives is not a ISO formatted date in the database. So, hey, guys, we need to do something on some layer that actually cleans that up and changes the format of the date, for example.
So you got the API absolutely right.
Yeah.
And exactly this is what we did. Even when it comes to 100 attributes, in our case, we also need to identify which country, which city, and also from which factory the card is being shipped out. So this also led us to another question to say, does that country even supports the backend system? Does it even supports these attributes?
Okay.
So this is, and because each country might have a different, exactly, with the dates, with the timings, and also with time zone.
Yeah.
So these were our three blockers that we had to first mitigate. And then we came to the second layer. We said, okay, let's just make it little generic and then start writing a piece of code to filter out the irrelevant information that we are getting it from the as a response.
And here exactly you could need to, like, if let's say that you got a Unix timestamp, like an epic timestamp, for example, from the source system, or you had, like, we had a case where we had like some servers in Sweden, some in somewhere in the Baltic region and somewhere else, and all of the servers for some unimaginable reason were having different time zones, and they were all handling dates without time zone information and times, and so we ended up with orders that were in the future because, you know, Sweden was ahead of time to Finland and stuff like that. So there are all these kinds of problems that the source systems or the kind of other system related to that might have, and then you have to kind of do all that figuring out that what layer needs to handle it so that the API would get this clean answer, or if it can get any answer. I mean, sometimes it might be that, for example, some countries it's just not possible, and then you need to figure out what to do then. Do you kind of get an infinite date or as an answer, or what do you do, like 404? So this ultimately comes to the actual design of the endpoint. So like, if we think that this is called like get card arrival date, or like, you know, cards, get cards, and then it's like arrival date as a or card identifier as a parameter there. So however we decide to design the actual endpoint from this, then we should decide what are the possible consequences, kind of what can happen. Is this like, okay, I asked with the card identifier, I get a list of cards. Okay, find status code 200 and then a JSON array of this information? Or is it that it's only one set of data like this? In this case, it probably would be, because there would be probably only one card at the time with one card identifier. So then it would be just, okay, fine, we found the card 200, okay, but what if we don't find any card with that identifier? What then? What happens?
So as of today, what we did, we just throw an error. We don't do because I think even getting this up and running is quite complicated from the backend side for us. And we want to just prove it's what you all just said. We want to first get it tested with the customer and actually make them pay for it, so that we can then get into commercials.
Exactly. So you would need to somehow make a prototype out of it, for example, with an API or something, and then, oh, nice, these annotations are staying. Let me erase something here. So,
and to be honest, when we started the entire API management program internally, this template was the most useful one because everyone is like, don't talk about business, don't, just tell me how can we make money out of it. Then I said, okay, fine, this is the most simple thing, just use it.
But that's exactly a clever way to do it, because then it's like starting from somewhere, and then they might find it useful, and then they might have less resistance later.
Right.
But get to the specification and to the design guidelines. So now the next question is that what this was actually the main topic today, or starting the main topic of today. So how do we get from that canvas, for example, into the actual API design with the proper status codes and ISO formatted dates and endpoint designs and everything else? And the question here is that does this guide currently support that? And should it specifically say something about how to use Open API specification to do the design? And that is kind of the main topic. And I didn't even think that we could find a kind of the end answer today to this question, but kind of like the validation of this question today, and then the direction of like, where should we maybe move with this, and possibly together. So what do you think, guys? A round of comments, please. Who wants to start? Ikenna or...
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking that it kind of makes sense that, well, on an implementation level, it kind of makes sense that we will start with API and with Open API, and this guide, this design guide, would actually support that. So we're starting with Open API, and we're defining our operations, defining the endpoints there, and this is actually supporting that, right? And helping kind of that collaboration and framing that. As a step before then implementation. So it kind of makes sense that this supports that API, Open API, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, this is very specific to REST, and there could be other things there, but.
And I'm actually digging out now, and maybe Miguel has a point to this, but this is what we're working on now in the Open API initiative. And this is now in my repo because I was doing the prettifying of the documentation, not writing all of it. So Javi from the Open API initiative has been writing the actual documentation, but this is going to be launched together with the new 3.1.0 version of Open API, which is, by the way, now decided that it's going to be out in mid-November. But so I was kind of thinking that maybe looking at this documentation and then kind of trying to figure out how to maybe reference to this, or how to maybe kind of make these work together, we could improve this guide. Yeah, that's like I haven't thought about yet exactly how, but I think that the most useful thing would be to combine the kind of, how do you get from these canvases to this actual design process, and then when you have stuff in a canvas, how do you actually describe it with the Open API syntax, and then there are other things like JSON schema and other things that come into play, and the actual data formats, but somehow like that. That's my current idea. But Miguel, are you still with us, and do you have any points that you would make to this?
Okay. The way I think that there should be a reference, or maybe it's good that we have a reference in every section of this document to point to Open API, but also keep tracking all other kind of manners to implement this API section or this API resource. In example, we use its paths. In Open API, we use a strict path identify on the path. So we should add a reference. The best way is using the identify in the path, but there are another alternative. You can use the identify in the query, or you can use the identify in the header. So you can make a reference on this section, on this document, on the resource API design to the Open API to track, but we should add more different manner to add. In the case of Open API or Async API, there should be another resources or any other asset that could be used for this part of the definition. It's in the same way that you add it there, the AVM API Connect or Azure, we can make it just specific for the standard Open API or any other standard and make a reference to that. But
if I get you right, like one thing, of course, is to kind of just make these links.
Yes, that's it.
That's kind of like the simplest way to do it, and change these references from, for example, Wikipedia and stuff. But yeah, if I got you right, it could be that we could kind of give maybe some specific, like, okay, if you need to do this kind of thing with this kind of API, like if you're designing a async or graphical or open API, then in that, with that standard you would, or that technology, you would do it like this, or you should think about these things. I mean, a lot of the stuff is actually pretty generic to all of them.
But it's good.
But then,
it's good that you keep that's very generic because that is a definition of this part.
Yeah.
And the people should understand what is working on this part, and then jump to examples on every standard. So you can jump to Open API, you can jump to Async API or GCP or any other. So
yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. And also it's kind of like the way that, for example, this Open API initiative documentation is now done, that there are these kind of examples of how this should look in this. And for example, there's a YAML and JSON example, for example, a few of these. So.
So it's not necessary that you have it's open like that. You can make a
file
in the, a combo, like a combo, and you can choose what standard are you using in your website or in your implementation, and you select Open API. So every change, every example is going to change to Open API or to another standard. Or may also with the links to the definition of the open standards. So.
I think we need to figure that out. I think that we need those examples in any format first, and then we'll need to also kind of, I think the next step might be to kind of just go through this current style guide and find out all the kind of very specifically, for example, RESTful things, or very specifically Open API related things. And then kind of see if they should stay there, or if they should move into that kind of, if you are doing Open API, if you are doing REST kind of option. Yes, please say something.
So may I suggest something? So 2 years ago, I was part of the ISO 222 working group, and even they have introduced a more open, I would say, a specification. They call it WAPI. It's Web APIs. And what would be actually interesting, at least in this page under privacy and security, maybe you could give some references to the substandards that's actually right now available across different regions. So you already know there's PST2, Berlin Group, there's open banking, because coming from the banking side.
Those are actually exactly for the, like, I think we need to also separate from the industry, because there are also others for healthcare and you know, other things.
And thing is, at least again with our example, what we did was we had our own company standards, and then we merged the ISO one, and then I asked the R&D team to also check the Open API specification to make sure that we try to have the API defined as per the industry standards. The simple reason was that some countries and some customers, they wanted in this format, and some wanted in different format, and we said we need to follow some format. So let's just follow the industry and what they understand. Most of the feedback came that everyone wants REST APIs. They don't want to experiment much on the new formats. So we said, okay, then let's just stick to the basics, have the privacy and security covered in a way that they are compliance. And if you have even a small snippet to say there are industry standards led by different organizations, then your page becomes a pointer for people like us to say, okay, this is where we go. We don't need to open different browsers or different documents. Just come here and then go into the individual standards if needed. So that would be a very good way to enhance this document
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. So yeah, I mean that basically brings me to when I was the product manager in the SaaS company, and we had to kind of always figure out if a feature was really kind of company specific or customer specific when they asked it, or if it was like regional or like country or industry or something. And that's exactly the same here. And I think that could be something valuable to show really clearly in terms of like both the technology and then the kind of industry and even like location, geolocation, kind of a region kind of stuff, because they will impact your API design, or you need to specifically avoid them, like that they wouldn't impact. So yeah, I think we need to figure out how that could work, and also kind of start collecting those links and references and examples and stuff. So what I would really like is that if you guys already have some in mind, some good links and stuff, for now, put them in the Slack. What we need to discuss next time is that how do we organize this? Like, one thing was that this used to be in a GitHub repo and GitHub pages as markdown pages. At that time, there were too many people around who just weren't able to join into that if it was in GitHub. And I think times are a little bit different now, and user community is a bit different now. So that might be the case that we could start doing it in a GitHub repo or collect issues or something like that. If somebody has some better ideas, we could discuss that. But let's first collect them now in Slack, just to kind of get them out there, and then I think that the next we are running out of time here, but the next meeting should be around this kind of whoever wants to be involved more than just at least trying to figure out if there are some portions that somebody has already thought of or could work on, and I can take on some stuff definitely, but how could we kind of move on with small steps and kind of input something here already that makes sense to put available for other people to use all the time. That would be so wonderful. Any last thoughts before we?
Yeah, that all sounds good, Marjukka. But one question I want to ask is, some stuff on this document is, I guess, REST focused. And in terms of, do we have any plan in terms of like whether we want a different version of this for, say, GraphQL, or whether we want to have like, in this document, we want to have like, if you're using GraphQL, then this applies.
I think that we need to like a lot of the stuff that applies for REST applies also to GraphQL, but GraphQL has also other stuff that you need to consider that isn't stuff that is in REST. So my gut feeling is that if we could handle the kind of REST and possibly the Open API and JSON schema related things first, then we could kind of isolate the stuff that needs to be changed for the GraphQL or for async API or something else. But we should keep that all the time in mind, that we have those different, and gRPC and whatever. So we should have the idea that there are these different ways and formats, and all the time kind of figure out what is generic and what is specific.
Yeah.
And I would categorize, like, this almost starts to need a database, but I would start to categorize things in terms of like industry specific, region specific, technology or format or standard specific, because we'll probably need to handle all those somehow in this. While they might be small things or nuances or kind of vocabulary stuff, or how to handle errors, for example, in GraphQL versus in REST or something like that. So they might be really small things that are different, but we know that there are some differences at least.
Yeah.
And for example, endpoint design, of course, has differences. That's for sure. But I think that it sounds like that there's a need maybe for this. What do you think?
Yeah.
Maybe not heavy lifting at first, but like at least some level of change, and then we could see how that works and get some feedback.
So definitely, I think there's a desperate need, and not because it is a bit of challenge to browse too many websites. So we need one central point, and this, in my opinion, this is the way to go for a lot of companies, especially considering the today's situation that we are in. Everything is digital, and if we have a central point to just go and understand how we can really develop the APIs and get it up and running, then it just really helps all the industries. And I'm obviously talking more from financial side, from banking.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sure
you're not alone. There are
yes,
a lot of
exactly.
people from that industry and
Yeah,
also from healthcare looking at this, and a lot
exactly.
of other industries, and also consultants, because it's also consultants need one place of truth, because sometimes it's really frustrating to kind of have those same discussions and same conversations with all the customers one by one. And
Yes.
well, this is the best way to version this for this situation. This is why you should, do this in this order, or it just helps if we kind of have this, however close to a single truth we can get. But yeah, I mean, obviously there will always be some room that needs to be kind of maneuvered in, but I think that at least some level of common understanding. But hey, it has been very nice to talk to you guys, and it's pretty much lunchtime in Finland. We eat really early, so I think that it's a good time to stop now, even though it's early morning for some of you. But let's make a plan to continue this, and we'll sort out some of the next times and continue in Slack. And I think we're in a good place. Everybody okay with having this recording shared, by the way, publicly? So
okay. Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, great, thank you. I'm sure that other people will appreciate everything that they can learn from this. Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Yep, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Bye.